Andy, welcome to the podcast. I've been honestly so stoked to meet with you. You and I are on a mission of helping people live healthier and happier lives. And this podcast, we talk about all aspects of health: social, mental, physical, spiritual. And what I love about you is you are in this incredibly niche area. We're going to talk about everything, but I want to talk about I want to give you an opportunity to talk about what you're focusing on as part of your doctoral program, right? You're in a PhD program on social health and psychology, right?
Yep.
But again, I've been so excited to talk to you because of our common goal of just helping people live these healthier, happier lives. I'm excited about talking about exercise and physical health and nutrition and all those things. But the things I'm probably most stoked about is our social health and social connection and how important that is. So I want to let you go off and just talk about, okay, who you are, what you care about. Like if you had 30 seconds to just kind of describe what you want people to know about you, what would that look like?
I was going to say, how much time do we have? I have 30 seconds.
We got time. Well, but you only got 30 seconds right now.
Yeah. Just okay. 30 seconds. Okay. So I study the connection between the brain and the heart and how social perceptions and our relationships impact biomarkers like heart health. And so, social health is super important. Our social relationships impact so many things about our health. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I study, and a little mix in of AI as well.
Yep. So, we talked a little bit off camera about this idea that we wish that some of our conversations that we've had could be the podcast because we've had some amazing conversations on this topic. So that's what you study, but talk to me more about it. Like what do you care about most? Like what do you want to do for the world? Like that's what you're studying. What does that even mean? How does that impact things?
Yeah. So I think it started when I was doing a bit of a analysis of my own friendship network.
Okay.
And I was kind of breaking it down to be like, okay, what does this friend give me? And like, how much energy does it take for me to hang out with this person versus how much benefit do they, bring? And how, positive is this relationship versus how negative? How often do I get together with them? And even how close do I feel to each one of these people? And some of them I don't feel as close to, but I still really value that relationship, right? And I also had other friends who they told me that even though we hadn't hung out in years, they're like, I see you as one of my best friends. And so that just kind of blew my mind. And I started thinking about, okay, friendships really do matter, and especially as adults. Yeah. And you and I have talked a little bit about this too, but especially as male adults, guys, we're not socially or culturally, trained to know how to retain our friendships. There's not an environment to retain those other than at work. Yeah. And so it can be challenging to keep friendships, but our relationships and our friendships have such a huge impact on our lifespan, on our biomarkers, they impact the most interesting things in our bodies that I never would have thought, until I kind of got into this. And so I was kind of studying it just avocationally for fun because I was interested before. Yeah. And then, and I was studying, positive psychology at the same time. And within positive psychology, the biggest factor, right, that impacts our happiness of a lot of the main factors of well-being is our relationships. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, okay, if I could, go deep on one of these things, what would it be? Yeah. And it was friendship and relationships.
Sorry, keep going.
Yeah, no. So that's where I was like, hey, PhDs are different than a bachelor's or a master's degree where you're it's a little more broad. You have to kind of pick one aspect of one thing, Yeah. And so I've been, not just snorkeling. I've been like scuba diving, right? Like deep sea.
Yeah.
Into how does the perception of our relationships with other people, connecting with other people, impact how our heart beats.
Yeah.
Heart rate variability.
Yeah.
So,
so that's fascinating because literally there's so much there that I want to dig into because there's just so much there. Everything. Just yesterday I recorded a podcast about men's health. To your point, like it's so hard for us as men to connect, and yet it's so critical for our health. I was literally talking to a gentleman the other day who was like, I don't eat necessarily well. I don't exercise a ton, but he's like, I have amazing connections. And he's like, I think that's the reason I never get sick. But I mean, that's just one small example of kind of how social connection. And if you just think about it, when you feel most connected, I would say that's probably when I feel the healthiest.
Totally.
Like even more than exercise and everything else, which is so important. That's why, that there's that the longest study on happiness, which I'm sure you're like most familiar, way more familiar than I am with it. But what did they say? The greatest predictor of success, of health and success is your connection, right? Your social relationships.
Yep.
And then again, I love your perspective because you're getting, like you said, you're scuba diving and you're getting into the depths of it. And it's fascinating to me that you're studying how social connection impacts our hearts.
Yeah.
Which there's so much symbolism there in general, let alone just the reality of science and the physicality and the biology of that.
Yes.
So can you explain a little bit more? Because HRV, our heart rate variability, is a little bit hard to understand. So can you explain why that's such an important biomarker? And then maybe expand a little bit more on how your thoughts. Give me your whole dissertation right now.
Yeah.
How social connection impacts our HRV and why that's important.
I'll start with a story. So a couple of years ago, I was out in Pennsylvania and my brother was getting married, which was super cool.
Yeah.
We were close to this city that I had heard of called Roseto, Pennsylvania. And it's this city that was in the early 1900s inhabited by all these Italian immigrants that moved there. They ate horribly. Like they would fry everything in lard and they'd smoke cigars and they would all the things that you would think like just are really bad for your heart, right? And their city, though, there was an epidemiologist who was studying this area in Pennsylvania, and he was just kind of like boggled by the heart health of the people of Roseto. And so he thought, okay, I need to figure out what's going on here. Like, what are they doing? That like their age is like better, their biomarkers are better, their numbers are better than all the other surrounding cities.
Interesting.
So he studied this city ethnographically and found that they were all super well connected. It was just like this big family. Doors were left unlocked. Everybody knew everybody. Yeah. There was always gathering. Just so many things about the community were just such a tight-knit community. And so he ended up coining this term, the Roseto effect, where like because of the social connectivity, their heart health was fantastic, regardless of, eating lard and smoking cigars and, red meat and all that stuff. So not to say that all those things aren't important. Like, somebody asked my mentor one time, which I always love sharing this. They said, so does that mean we can, just go smoke with our friends, as long as we have good friends? And it's like, well, I mean, smoking still does have an impact. There's a true effect size that like impacts your lifespan, and there's all kinds of correlations there that are not good.
Well, that's just a funny, not to interrupt, but that's just a funny connection, right? Because I know you work a lot with Dr. Julianne Holt-Lunstead, right? Yeah. And she's one of the first, from what I understand, correct me where I'm wrong, one of the first to basically show the true correlation and impact of how lack of social connection impacts our physical health, specific heart disease, all those types of things. I think it was her study that came up with it's lack of social connections, the equivalent of smoking 12 cigarettes a day or 15, something like 15 cigarettes a day. Yeah. So it's just interesting that you bring up the smoking thing again, and that's kind of the background, but keep going.
No, it's true. And so I think that, to answer your question about heart rate variability, right? I think heart rate variability is a really interesting metric. It's kind of, I wouldn't say it's a window to the soul, but in some ways it kind of is, because it's a direct reflection of your vagus nerve health, which is like this, direct, like this connection between your brain and your heart, like
So cool.
how it talks.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's bidirectional, but it shows it's a very good, like one, if you want to take one metric and that's it, to see like what's your overall like mental and physical health. Like HRV is a pretty good one.
Okay.
It varies per age, right? Like everybody, it's a little different in each age category. It's also different per like, male, female, like it's very different. So you can't necessarily compare those two. But it's really, really powerful as a single biomarker, right?
Can you define it, like what it actually is, right? Like,
Yeah.
because I think that's hard for people to understand too.
Totally. So it's different from heart rate, right? Like heart rate is like, right now, like we probably have like 70s, 80s, maybe 60s if we're like, I don't know,
Super
more
fit,
relaxed,
athletic,
fit. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, but the heart is not a metronome, hopefully. It's, not going to be exactly the same in terms of every beat, right? It's going to vary a little bit, right? And this is like variations in like milliseconds, right? So if you're looking at an EKG graph, right, there's these like peaks, they're like the R peaks. And those peaks, like if you measure from one peak to the next, that's how we measure the variation.
Okay.
So like from one peak to the next, it's probably going to be about an average of between, 600 and maybe 1500 at the highest, like milliseconds.
Okay.
And so as that varies,
So the time between beats. Okay.
Yeah. So like, a second, give or take a half a second, right? Or so. And so that's pretty normal. But like that variation of milliseconds, usually above 50 milliseconds in variation across 5 minutes of heartbeats is going to be
cumulative.
Okay. Yeah. At least that's how you measure it. Like obviously there's variation with like 10 heartbeats too.
Right.
But across 5 minutes, you're looking at, that many heartbeats. And then if you calculate the variation between all those across 5 minutes, even across like 20 minutes, it's even more accurate depending on if you stay at rest or, depending on what you're doing. Right.
Right.
But resting heart rate variability. So after having sat down for like 5 minutes at least, and then taking about a 5 to 10 minute measurement of heartbeats, you can find out what that variation looks like. So that's what I do. I hook people up to a heart rate monitor, chest strap, and it's an EKG, get that exact electrical, signal with our peaks, and we measure their variability.
And is high or low good? What's good there?
Yeah. So
and why?
Right. Yeah. So it's like you think about heart rate and it's like, well, if you have a high heart rate,
bad.
you're like, oh, you're like either you're exercising, which isn't always bad, right? Or you're like freaked out, you got like the fight or flight going and your like heart's racing. And so you're like trying to, escape or do, be ready for an emergency or whatever.
Yeah.
Heart rate variability, high is actually really good.
Okay.
So like if you have more variation between like if you have, I mean, this is a very bad example, but it's like, let's just say 10 heartbeats, right? Or 5. Like here's one that's like this big between the peaks. Here's one that's like this big, and then this big, and then this big, right? It's like as it kind of changes and adapts, that's good. That's a good thing. You're going to have a higher variability rate. If your heart if it just stays the same every single time. So like when you're sick, when you have a fever, right? And you're recovering and your body's working really hard, your heart rate variability is going to tank.
Interesting.
It's going to be like very metronomic, like very just like, not very much variation between heartbeats.
It's
because it's working harder. It's just like, it can't relax as much.
So that's why it's more consistent.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of factors, but that's part of it.
Okay, because it's almost that's fascinating to me, and you're helping me understand this so much more. Because it's
Yeah.
almost it just from a surface level, it almost seems counterintuitive because you're thinking
Right.
if it's steady and consistent. Because if I'm understanding it correctly, again, it's the time between heartbeats, right?
Yes.
And how that's the variability, and whether it's short or long. So it seems like if it was consistent, then you're like a steady, calm
Yeah.
person, steady state.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's almost you're saying the opposite.
Correct.
So that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you can be at a somewhat steady state, right? Like on average, your heart rate, which like if your Apple Watch or Fitbit or whatever, like it's kind of giving you an average, right? It's going to say like, it's around 80, beats per minute.
Right.
And it calculates that based off of an average.
Right.
And that's great. When you're sleeping, hopefully it's like in the 60s or 50s or even 40s if you're like really athletic, right? Maybe high 30s if you're crazy. And then, regular walking around, you're like 80s, 90s, 100, you're right. And so, yeah, like if you like, yeah, but the variability is different.
Okay.
And so
I guess it kind of makes sense in this in the aspect of if you think that like when you exercise, you do get your heart rate to go really, really high, right?
Yeah.
So if you're doing that more, then your heart rate variability is going to be higher, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So I guess that makes sense.
And so it maybe is helpful to look at it from the standpoint of adaptability. Like how resilient is your heart?
Okay.
How adaptable? Is it able to adapt to a situation? So like you go lift a, really heavy weight, you're doing some weight training, your heart rate goes up. How quickly does it come back down? If
that
you're
makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
If you are, let's say you almost get in a car accident and it's like, oh my gosh. And like you have this adrenaline rush and there's this bit of a shock and you're like, wow, like I just averted death. Right.
Yeah.
And your heart's like, wow. Sympathetic nervous system. So yeah, that is very active. And then you get to your destination, you're out of your car, you're safe. How quickly does your brain and heart adapt to bring that heart rate back down to a resting rate, right? So
that's super helpful.
So yeah, that's part of the vagal tone, right? The vagus nerve is this nerve between the brain and the heart. And there's a lot of cool theory, like the polyvagal theory from Porges, I think is his last name.
Okay.
There's a lot of interesting theories as well.
Yeah, you hear a lot about the vagus nerve. What's one of your favorite theories or ones that you subscribe to?
Definitely polyvagal theory. Okay. And then
which says
just basically that like there is a connection between the brain and the heart, and the vagus nerve mediates that connection.
I love that.
So you have the autonomic nervous system in your brain, right? And that governs a lot that goes on in your body. That includes sympathetic, which is the fight and flight, and then parasympathetic, which is the rest and digest. And so you've got this like, you need to be able to have the sympathetic the like fight and flight, like to get you like to survive, right? Like even going from sitting to standing, and like sitting to laying, right? Or standing to running, like your sympathetic nervous system is like key for that, right? Like it helps to increase your heart rate so that you can have enough blood and oxygen to be able to, sustain. But then if it didn't like slow back down when you were coming back to rest, like, that's what your parasympathetic is for. Yeah. So heart rate variability is a good window into your autonomic nervous system and your ability, your parasympathetic ability, like capacity, basically.
It's interesting, Andy. Honestly, I just feel like as you're talking, I feel like you figured out one of the biggest secrets of life, or studying the biggest secret areas of like the most important areas of life. It's interesting when I first started, when I decided I was going to leave the corporate world and get into what I wanted to do. It's a long story and I won't get into that, but I connected with a guy named Jim Lair. I can't remember. Did we talk about Jim? Do you know who Jim Lair is?
A little bit. Yeah, I think so.
So Jim is the first, he was a clinical psychologist who then, he's basically one of the OGs of sports psychology.
Okay. That's right.
Right. And yes. He's got this book, he's got multiple books, but one is The Powerful Engagement and things like that. And because my background is leadership development, teaching executives how to be better leaders. And he started a very similar leadership program, but he combined it with health. And it was fascinating to me because what he did was he basically said, hey, like, so you'd go to a 2.5-day course in this world-class facility in Florida, and he'd run you through a 2.5-day course on leadership. And you bring in these top executives from Fortune 500 companies from across the world. They'd come in and they're getting their blood drawn. They're getting all these things. And his idea was, if it was basically maximizing your energy levels, and the idea that, hey, if you'll be a much better leader if you've optimized your energy levels, you'll have much more energy to be a better leader, be a better father, be a better whatever it is in your life. And so he was kind of this performance psychologist. In fact, it actually dates back a little bit further than that, because you're into positive psychology. So I will talk about that route. So when I first wanted to go and do consulting for these executives, I was like, okay, what's one thing that I can do to kind of round out? And sorry, this is me going off a little bit on why I love what you're doing so much.
I know, I love it. This is great.
So I reached out to a guy named Tal Ben-Shahar at Harvard.
Yes.
Do you know Tal?
Totally.
Okay. So Tal was, for those who don't know, Tal was he's a positive psychology guy, right? He's basically at Yale and Harvard, the two most popular courses in the history of Harvard and Yale, from what I understand, are these courses on positive psychology, on happiness. Yeah. It's because people are just desperate. They're so desperate to be happy and to find happiness. So we'll talk more about that and loneliness and all those kinds of things. But I reached out to him and I said, okay, if I'm going to help executives, what could be my niche area? And I thought the mental piece. So that's why I reached out to Tal, because he was so good at the positive psychology, the mental piece, and how that could help you be a better leader. And so I reached out to him and he's like, hey, I love what you're doing, but you want to do more than just positive psychology. And it sounds like you've gone a similar route where you started. I don't know if you've done so many amazing things, but positive psychology was one of the things, right? But then Tal's like, you want to do more than that. You want to do performance psychology. So then he connects me to Jim. And Jim, I find out, again, my background's doing these leadership trainings. He does these leadership trainings, but he's doing it with health. And I'm like, this is cool, because he is teaching these leaders how to be better leaders by helping them take care of their health.
I love it.
Which is just, there's so much there. Go ahead.
Huge.
Yeah.
I feel like, like if you can, I agree with that. And I think I've experienced it recently where I just have been trying to optimize like my routines and also like my supplement stack and just exercise and stuff so that I actually feel like energized and clarity, all that.
Yeah.
And doing that, like focusing on that this year, it's just like, I feel like a new human. I feel like I can just, it's like a refresh on life, right? Like I like renewed my lease and I feel like I'm in my 20s again and I'm not, like, you know, like
you look like it.
Oh, well, thank you. I feel like it, you know.
That's amazing.
It's awesome. And like I feel energized, and I agree with what you said. Like when we feel good, right?
Yeah.
It's everything changes. Somebody said, so I can't remember who this was, but it's just like when, and I might just butcher this, but it's like when we have good health, we're worried about a lot, like 1,000 things. When we don't have good health, we're worried about one thing.
That's all we worry about.
That's it.
Yeah.
And so it's like, you know, and maybe not worried, but like we're our goal, that's what it is. Like when we have good health, we have 1,000 goals. When we have bad health, we have one goal. Yeah. Right.
It's interesting that you say that. I'm just going to tag onto that a little bit, because it was the Dalai Lama. I love this quote from him. He said that somebody asked him, when he was asked, what surprises you most about humanity? He said, man. He's like, I just don't get it. I mean, I'm paraphrasing the Dalai Lama here.
Yeah.
But he's like, I don't get it, because they spend their whole life trying to accrue this wealth and all this money at the cost of their health, only to spend the rest of their life and all their money trying to get their health back.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Yes. Right? And that's why my goal is to help, and you have the same goal, is to help people now. And like you said, so how many people on their deathbed are saying, I wish I worked more, or I wish I did this? It's I wish I had better relationships. I wish I had better connections, all those kinds of things. And it's about feeling good. And what really allows you to feel good
Yeah.
and that's why I'm saying I think you've gotten to the secret. Because when I was talking to Jim, he's like, hey, Sean, I love what you're doing. You're further along than 90% of the people that I work with in this area. But he's like, if you really want to take it to the next level, study the brain. And it was kind of like he said it and I was like, okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
And then I kind of sat with it for a little bit and I called him back and I was like, Jim, and again, a little bit background on Jim. He was originally a clinical psychologist who then I was like, oh, this should work in sports. So he was one of the original sports psychologists. And then he took it to the corporate world and said, hey, if it works in sports, this should work in Fortune 500 companies as well. So he's just got this really cool background on how he does stuff. But in everything that he's done in terms of what makes people feel good and tapping into the secrets of optimizing their health so they can be the best at whatever it is they want to be. Again, a teacher, a leader, an athlete, whatever it is.
Yes.
Taking care of your health is the most important thing. And then he said, if I were you, if you do anything, because I'm like, do I need to go get a Ph.D. in something to really have the credibility? And he said, if you do, he's like, first of all, you don't need to, you can partner with someone. And that's why I'm working with people like the director of neuroscience at Wharton or like all these different folks doing some amazing things. But he's like, study the brain. Yeah. He's like, the brain is the last frontier. We know so little about the brain. And in my mind, you're going even a step further because you're talking about the brain-heart connection.
Yeah.
And to me, you can't have two more important aspects of our health, right? And how it impacts everything about who we are, what we do, what we think, how we feel. So talk to me more just about that brain heart connection. And even with, well, anyway, any thoughts on any of that?
Yeah, no, I love it all. And something that blew my mind when I was diving deep, right, is that the heart actually has its own nervous system that
it's interesting.
Some people have called the mini brain.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and it can't necessarily have social cognition or things like that. Right. But it has like a good number of neurons, like tons, right, of neurons, like not as many as the brain, right, or the gut, but it's got its own little thinker, right, and then that connects directly to the brain, and and I would also say there's like this mediation and like connection to the gut too, right?
Yeah, it's just gonna go there, right? Because we're talking about
crazy.
Think about that. Yeah, the brain, the heart, the gut, because they also say that the gut is like another brain.
100 million neurons
right
down there.
Exactly. So, okay, keep going on that.
Yeah, so there's a huge connection, and that's something that I think is interesting. One of the other theories is the neurovisceral model of integration, which is basically how that polyvagal connection of like brain heart is like, where is it happening, and like what's going on in the brain, and it talks a lot about how our prefrontal cortex, the attention center, right, is really a part of that connection. So things like, for example, mindfulness, breath work, like things like that, where we're really engaging our prefrontal cortex and just like getting into that state of present and like really trying to, modulate our heart rate and through our breath. Like, it's crazy how much you can improve your heart rate variability with just breathing.
Yeah.
Like, it's amazing. Like, I feel like, anyway, so it's
it's cool. Interesting. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole necessarily, but I was just talking to somebody yesterday was asking me about my thoughts on psychedelics.
Oh yeah.
And and the idea was how they can be so therapeutic and helpful in all these different ways. And I'll just say, like, I've never done them, and I definitely am not necessarily opposed because I can understand how it could be used for therapy purposes, and I've heard and seen a lot of amazing things.
Yeah.
But my philosophy is, if you can do it in a natural way, and not that some people might even argue that that's natural, right? But if you can, what a lot of neuroscientists will say, to your point, you can actually do that through breath work. You can get that same kind of impact that you're getting with these psychedelics through breath work. Joe Dispenza says the same thing. Like, you can really, and when you're doing it that way, how much more empowering is it if you're doing it for yourself versus relying on a substance to do it for you? Whether it's plant medicine is you call it a drug or you call it a plant, like whatever you want to call it. The point is you are relying on something else, which again, there might be a place for that. And I don't deny that. And that's why I'm not necessarily opposed to it. But I do think that too many people push the easy button with anything, any kind of medicine for your health, right? Yeah. It's about an easy button of like, oh, I'm going to go take this antidepressant because that's easier. Or and again, make sure I preface this with,
oh yeah,
I have family. There's nothing wrong by itself of taking medicine, and it might be super
could be life-saving.
It could be life-saving, right? Yeah. Absolutely.
Totally.
But to the extent that we possibly can do things for ourselves naturally, it's the reason I like cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, when you're talking about mental health, because it's how much more empowering it is to be able to work yourself through something through the power of your mind and your brain versus relying on something that doesn't solve the root of the problem. You're just numbing some of the symptoms and some of the pain. Whereas you learn these techniques, these skills that actually like get to the root so that it's not a problem anymore. And it's that much deeper. That's why I like just that idea that you bring up breathwork and how that can impact your heart rate variability.
Totally.
So anyway, that's just some fascinating thoughts.
I mean, to be super simple about it, right? Like like you could do it right now, like while you're listening to this, like whoever's out there listening, just focus on your breath, and we'll just take a couple of breaths, right? So it's like in and then out, and kind of hold the out, and then in and then out. Okay, so I don't know how aware you are of your heart rate or if you could feel your heart beating, but it's like as you breathe in, your heart rate increases a little bit, that sympathetic tone. Yeah. And then as you breathe out and you hold that out, the heart rate goes do, do, do. Like it starts getting slower and it's adapting, right? Like that's heart rate variability. You just experienced it. So like that it's powerful.
Yeah.
I mean, how many did we take? Like 4 breaths or something? Like 3? Like imagine doing that for 10 to 15 minutes a day.
Yeah.
I mean, who doesn't have 10 to 15 minutes a day?
Totally.
I was looking at my screen time. It was bad.
At least you're honest.
and I
mine too, by the way.
Yeah, like I got this app. Speaking of health, I feel like this is a really important aspect of health because I calculated my trajectory of the rest of my life based on I'm 41 years old. If I were to reach 86, right? It calculated that I would be looking at my phone for 31 years.
Oh.
31 years staring at my phone.
No way.
And I was like, wow.
Wow, I need to go through that same exercise.
Yes.
That sounds amazing.
And so after I used this app, this is not a like promotion for the app, but it was amazing. Like, and it's free. The one that I use, it's called Opal.
Okay.
And like,
good night. After
having used it for like a month, it said, hey, looks like you're on track to get 18 years of your life back.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, that's amazing, right? Like it takes away all this time during the day that like I just default because, we just default to our phones and social media, whatever. And like, what if you spent just like 1/10 of that time on your phone, like in breath work, in modulating your nervous system to where like we have all these anxiety disorders of depression. Like what if we could do it ourselves by just like scaling back the years of life on our phone?
That's amazing. Andy, there's so much there that I want to dig into. Because I know you've just created somewhat of a tool about biological age. So I want to talk about that.
Yes.
But I want to talk a little bit more about what you were saying, just that breathing exercise that we just did.
Yeah.
And then also the positive compounding effect when you do take care of your health. It's just like anything else. On the negative side, when you dismiss and aren't attentive to your health, it's compounding on the negative front, right? When you don't exercise, you often eat poorly as well. The converse is true as well, right? Like when you exercise, you want to eat healthier, right? When you do breath work, you're not doing time on your phone. You're doing breath work. One, you're decreasing. You're getting years back of your life.
Yeah.
You are you're improving your heart rate variability, which is having so many other impacts, right? If you're not on your phone as much, you're probably having more time for social connection. So the positive compounding effects are amazing as well.
Yeah.
And that's what I really want to focus on with people is just getting in that rhythm of doing a few things. And like you said, it's about feeling good.
Yeah.
It's like feeling your best. And when you do that, you feel like you got a reset in life.
Yeah.
I have felt the exact same way.
Yeah.
The last couple of years. You and I are similar in age.
Yeah.
And I feel better than I've ever felt because of some of these things. Now I'm not perfect at it, right?
Totally.
But when I'm doing it, gosh, it's amazing the positive compounding impacts that it has.
Yeah.
So, and I want to not shift necessarily, but pause and recognize that I didn't give Andy a very good introduction at the beginning because I'm just so fascinated with this stuff. But there's a reason that your work, like you've been, where did I write this down? You've been in freaking New York Times, ABC News, Fox News. You've done work with Teen Vogue and The Hill, and you write for Psychology Today. So this stuff is legit, right? And it's coming. I think it's only the beginning of so many things that we're going to see from you that like, you've already done so much, and I think that you're on to some amazing stuff. But I don't know, were you going to share some thoughts on something there?
Well, no, I mean, I think it's really important, and I think part of the reason why, the last 10 years before I did the Ph.D, my career was in marketing, right, and PR and social media, and it's really important, and for researchers that are doing good research, to get their research out there.
Yeah.
And so I feel like, and my advisor, Julianne Holt-Lundstad, she's so good at this. Like she's been featured all over the place, like, times that list by 100 that you just said. And she's like just totally legit. Right. And yeah, so, and here's why. So I just published 2 studies with Julianne in the last month, which is like super exciting.
Yeah.
Scientific studies. We did a study where we looked at what do people, like general population, it was a U.S. nationally representative sample, and then also a gender balanced sample in the U.K. So both U.S. and U.K., like what do they think about how important social connection is for our health?
Yeah.
We also looked at doctors and nurses and asked them. It was a smaller sample because doctors are really hard to get a hold of. But
which that's a whole nother thing, by the way. I'm connected with this guy who focuses on. It's funny that healthcare workers are some of the people that are worst at taking care of their health because of the demands. But we'll talk about that another time. But keep going.
Totally, I have so much like compassion for healthcare workers. But yeah, like all of them, right, underestimated the importance of social connection for its impact on health. And I mean, there's so much that shows, right? Like in terms of its effect size on longevity and on like years of life and how it impacts, all cause mortality, like all these different things. It's scientifically validated, right? Like there
100%.
is tons of data, like so much data on this. And we're still focused on things like that are important: exercise, not smoking, alcohol, all those things. Like they were all rated as much more important than social connection, and social connection is really at the top.
That's interesting. Would you put social connection above everything else? How would you do it?
Depends on a few things.
Okay.
But and it's not necessarily where I would put it, but like the effect size itself, like it's at the it's in the top, right? In terms of if we were to look at the top 15, it's probably number 2 or 3.
I freaking love that, and that's why, like I said, I obviously focus on exercise. I focus on nutrition, but the thing I am most passionate about of all of it is the social piece, the social health piece that people up until now, thankfully, thanks to you and people like Dr. Julianne Holt-Lundstad and Dr. Murthy have like made this much more of a known issue,
Yeah.
right? And it's so important and so grateful. Like you said, that's why I love that you have a marketing background, because you're right. Like, it's critical. It's one thing to do the research, but getting it out there. That's why I'm
Yep.
grateful for people like Huberman, right? And
People don't know about it.
people don't know about it, and that's what I want to do with you, with anybody else who wants to join this mission of getting it out there as much as possible, how critical this is to your health.
Yes.
When I read Dr. Murthy's book on loneliness and the lack of social connection, and he obviously cites Dr. Julianne Holt-Lunstad, and they're on a team together in multiple ways, right? And doing some cool things. I don't remember being more passionate about a book. And it, a good book. It's such a phenomenal book.
Good. Yeah.
Like, I mean, I think it just touches on things. Everybody should read this, because it's one thing to, here's just the thought. It's one thing, you talk about how it's so validated, deeply validated by science. There's so much data out there supporting this, but yet people still don't know too much about it. Hopefully we'll change that. But then I love that exercise that we did, that breathing exercise.
Yeah.
Because to me, like, even literally just thinking about it right now, I feel differently. Like, in other words, when we took those breaths, you said it perfectly. You can feel your heart rate kind of slow down and feel peace and feel calm.
Yeah.
And when I think about when I've been the most connected, or when I think about my relationships, when I like get rid of all the fight or flight from just surviving in life, and I think about my connections and relationships, my heart has a similar impact on my heart.
Yes.
And that's it's crazy. So you don't need to even look at the science. You can validate it for yourself by just going through that experience and think about, and if you're missing that, if you don't feel that peace and calm, then one of maybe the first areas you can start is connection.
Yeah.
And social connection. Sorry,
it's where you were talking about before, right? These like, and I love the term that Barbara Friedrichsen, another like rock star researcher, talks about. She calls it positive upward spirals.
Yeah.
Right.
I
like
love that.
upward spirals of positivity and health. Like you change one thing for the better, and it like, boom, it sets into play a cascade of amazing things in the body and the mind.
Yes.
And the cool thing about it is like those breaths that we just took, like that modulation, that like down regulating of the sympathetic nervous system, that can last, like the effects of that can last for like 90 days.
Wow.
In your body.
Wow.
Like, that's crazy.
Yeah.
To me, right? Like, so stuff that you did 3 months ago is impacting you right now.
That's incredible. Which is, again, I'm a huge fan of cold plunges, but those impacts, there's immunity things and everything else, but we're talking about that impact will last for hours. We're talking about 90 days.
Yeah.
Right? That's
sometimes
phenomenal.
Longer. Yeah.
That's crazy.
And you think about, I mean, this is very Deepak Chopra, but like, like your body, all the cells, the atoms, everything in your body is like replaced, right? It's constantly being like recycled. Like your body's like getting rid of the old and building new, right? Yeah. And like all the cells are being replaced. So like, what are you replacing those cells with? Like what kind of, positive energy, right? Like, to get a little woo woo, right? Like, but it's also kind of scientific too, right? So
I've always said we're at a point in history finally where the science is catching up to the woo woo.
Yeah.
Right. For so long, everything from Think and Grow Rich to, people have talked about the power of the mind and manifestation and all that kind of stuff, but it's been super woo woo.
Yeah.
But now the science is actually catching up to some of this stuff.
Yeah.
Because there's things biologically and scientifically happening in your body that makes that possible. Anyway.
Totally. Yeah. So like your genetics will like, kind of pave the way, and it'll have kind of the blueprint of like, hey, here's what you should do, cell. But like all those cells are going to be brand new cells, right? And not a very long time, like maybe a year. Most of the cells in your body within a year, like, are going to be completely different cells.
Crazy.
Which is nuts.
You talk about genetics. It is so nuts, and I'm in awe. And again, for me, that is just the incredible perfection and wisdom of a God who created that. That I'm just going to say that flat out like that. I'm in awe of how all of it works so amazingly well.
Yeah.
That's a whole nother subject, but that idea of, you talk about genetics, but then our cells change. That's why I love this idea of epigenetics, right?
Yeah.
You're familiar with epigenetics? Like, for those who aren't, and I would love your definition of epigenetics, but basically part of the idea is that your genes can actually change based on your environment, right? And so whether that's a good social connection environment or, just a healthy home for children to grow up in, and the hormone balances that happen because of, you literally change your genes.
Yes.
We're going to have, an epigenetics guy on the podcast here really soon. So I'm really fascinated to talk more about that, but it's amazing what our body does and the power that we have to impact that. And to your point, this positive upward spiral, I feel like there's this beautiful relationship between us and our bodies that when we take care of it, it returns the favor tenfold. If we and it's this beautiful spiritual connection as well. Like we're truly, we're so blessed to have these bodies that we have.
Yeah.
And it responds in kind and then some when we do take care of it. It's amazing.
Totally.
Anyway.
No, I love that so much. And I have so many thoughts, but one of the theories that I want to point out to that kind of is a part of this whole conversation is what's called the social baseline theory.
Okay.
So we co-regulate. When we're talking about the body, right? You're talking about the amazing body, right? And it is amazing, right? And this the epigenetics and how it all comes together in the cells, replacing an autophagy and all this stuff. It's just right?
Mind blowing. It really is mind blowing when you look at this science.
It is.
Keep going.
What's crazy, even more crazy to me, and it's kind of it starts to blow my mind even more, is no body should be alone.
Amen.
We all co-regulate with each other. Okay. And there's incredible synergy that happens when there are human bodies together in the same space. Mm-hmm. From a physics standpoint, right? With the electromagnetic fields, they all interact. From the voice and the neuromodulation and heart rate variability, all these different things. They've done studies on people in stadiums where they become in sync.
Crazy.
Right? When they're all cheering for the same team.
Yeah.
Choirs when they're singing the same song, and they're breathing the same.
Yeah.
Their heart rates sync up. People in a conversation when they're having this Barbara Friedrichsen has this she calls it positivity resonance. Your bodies biologically sync together.
Yeah.
And so social baseline theory is basically this idea that we co-regulate. And so then if we're around other people, it takes much less energy for our brain and our body than if we are alone.
Yeah.
And so when we're isolated, you think about it, you go, best example is just would you rather go camping on your own, with a sleeping bag and a backpack in the middle of a wilderness with bears, right? Or would you rather go with somebody else?
Yeah.
And you can't bring guns. Right? Maybe you should bring a gun just in case. But you would rather go with other people, right?
Yeah.
And you would probably rather go with a group of 40 people than one other, right?
Right.
And so that's the very basic way of looking at it. But that's how we regulate.
I am floored by this idea, and that's why I love you so much, dude, because I could nerd out with you. We could do this podcast for hours talking about this stuff because it's crazy. And you might have some people on that camping analogy to say, no, I actually and it's this whole I'm going to go find myself type thing.
Sure.
Which
it's solitude.
There's solitude is actually a beautiful thing, right? But and it really is. But when you get into the overall, for your wellness and everything else, no question, the idea of being around others is much better. Also, I have so many thoughts. I'm trying to, hopefully I can get them out.
Yeah.
Because even then, when, in my opinion, oh my gosh, there's so many thoughts right now. In my opinion, there was this, I don't know, 10 years ago maybe is when it I don't know the timeline necessarily, but there was kind of this time where people were kind of ditching religion to go be spiritual.
Yeah.
Right. and then you had all these people on their self-finding journeys. I'm going to go find myself, and it was this eat, pray, love. I'm going to go do this kind of stuff. And again, I'm not opposed to some of these things in principle. No, like there's some beautiful things as a part of that, but in my opinion, so much of that turned into, it wasn't go find myself. It was just an excuse to be selfish. And that also isolated people in a lot of ways. Whereas when we think that we're not meant to do things alone, right? We're not meant to, we are social creatures. We are wired for connection.
Yeah.
And anyway,
Totally.
When we kind of turn inward on things and forget about our whole relationship with others, I think that's scary and problematic. Yeah. But then I want to dig into, you also made me think of two things. One is I have a good connection with Dr. Michael Platt. He's the director of neuroscience at Wharton. Amazing guy. He was just on Huberman's podcast talking about this. And he literally mentioned, he used to be the director of neuroscience at Duke Medical Center. This guy's legit in so many ways, and in some really phenomenal ways. But he talked about synchrony. And because again, I do consulting for executives and how to be a better leader and better performer, and a team dynamic, like doing things together with your coworkers is so critical for performance. Yeah. And he talks about that idea of synchrony and how important that is for performance. Yes. So that's mind blowing. I also have this, I want to write a book about this, to be honest. Yeah. But so I'm also connected with another researcher. She was a Columbia professor. She was a director of neuroscience, she was like the chief neuroscientist at the Neuro Leadership Institute. She's phenomenal. Her name is Dr. Janine Stewart. She has, she's got this really cool, I don't know if theory is the right word, but basically a framework also about team performance and what leads to ultimate performance. And one of the biggest things is connection. Trust, connection leads to performance and resilience. And I know Dr. Murthy talks a lot about how social connections impacts resilience. So you think about the impact of social connection on both performance and resilience, which is a form of performance, right? Yeah. How to handle things when things get rough. And then I also think about, because I love sports, and I think about literally, do you follow sports very much?
A little bit.
Okay. So I don't know if you followed the college football playoffs or even the Super Bowl or any of this stuff. It's mind-blowing to me. Mind-blowing that what these kids talk about when they're interviewed. First thing, the first 30 seconds out of their mouth, almost every one of them is, I'm thanking God. I'm thanking God that allows me to be here and be able to perform. So they believe that they're part of something bigger than themselves.
Yes.
And then they talk about how, they get asked questions. What allowed you to be so good on the field? What allowed you to be such an amazing performer on the field? It's all about how much we love each other as a team and how connected we are as a team. And I have a whole nother theory about, like, I do believe, just from a scientific perspective, that connection is what really led to that performance. And what brought them and allowed them to connect in these cases, ironically enough, was actually God, which is really, really cool. Boise State, I'm from Boise, has the same thing, right? Every single one. I mean, these guys are baptizing each other. Ohio State, who won the college football championship, same thing. All these players they're doing worship together. They're baptizing each other. They're like, God has brought them together in such a in this incredibly unifying way. And phenomenal to see how that brought them together, allowed them to trust each other, connect with each other, and how that impacted their performance. Yeah. To freaking win championships, to win Super Bowls. The power of connection, in my mind, is what really allowed that to be possible. Connected to God and all that kind of stuff, but it's amazing how that all works together. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Totally. I mean, okay, there's something that's interesting. This is a little bit of a rabbit hole, but it's
go for
it. Called the
Tommy's here. Can we go over by like 2 hours? Go ahead.
Yeah, it's so when we, like you said, when we're being observed, oftentimes our performance increases, right? When we think we're around other people.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's it's an interesting phenomenon, right, in social psychology. And so I've wondered about this sometimes. I think it's called social facilitation, and because like I run faster when I'm around other people. I train harder when I'm with other people. I do, and like my fastest. So when you ask me if I follow sports, I still follow track. Like I was a sprinter, hurdler, and so like, I still follow track, and all the, they're all like, it's true what you said. Like they're all just like glory to God, like all the best ones. And but my fastest times, like I was like, okay, I'm giving this one to God, like back in the day.
Yeah.
And I like ran with God,
Yep.
And and like, I've gone through a lot of different interesting journeys spiritually, religiously, but I still believe there is so much power in that, that relationship, that perception, even if you don't think it's a person, but it's just like, I'm not alone.
Yep.
Like I am connected to the earth and to the universe and to a greater collective consciousness. Like I love what Maya Angelou says, where she's like, every time I get up on stage, like I bring everybody with me, like all the people who I've ever, served, all the people who've ever served me. I say like, come with me. Right. And like, I love that. Like, and she says like long dead, like they're all with me, and I believe that deeply. Like there's people who have passed on that like they are with me and they strengthen me greatly.
Thank you for sharing that. First of all, I admire and respect that thought process so much. And she's one of my heroes too. She's just phenomenal. But to your point, it's all about connection, connection to each other's, connection to God. But that idea of connection and how that impacts us genuinely directly impacts our health and well-being, our performance, all the things. It's, and also again, that idea of being connected to something greater than ourselves, both God, who's greater than us, and then as a collective humanity, as we are part of something bigger as a group, right? And it's fascinating. And one of my favorite people that I follow, it goes in line so well with everything that we've talked about, is Dr. Huberman. I follow him a ton, and he's a neuroscientist. He's cool because he's made neuroscience cool, right? He's made it relative to the everyday person, and he's brought things.
Translates it.
But he doesn't just talk about the brain. He doesn't just talk about how you can heal from trauma and learn how to talk again after having a stroke and wire your brain that way. He talks about mental and physical performance.
Yeah.
And he gives, I think it's 9 pillars of mental and physical performance. And spiritual connection is one of those, right? He talks about exercise. He talks about nutrition, our relationship to light, all those different things, our gut microbiome we've talked about. Yeah. But he talks about spiritual grounding is one of those pieces and how important that is. And he's like, he was interviewed on a podcast, and he's like, of course I pray. He's like, I don't know if he used to do that a lot, but he's like, the more I get into this, he's like, I rely on prayer. And he's one of these top scientists, right? And sometimes people say this idea of science and religion, or science and God, don't necessarily go together. They absolutely do. Yeah. I think, in my opinion, God is the creator of the science, and so it all goes together. It's how he created the world. And being connected to those things, again, both to God and to other people. But Huberman says, I pray because I know, one is I'm being connected to something bigger than myself, and also I know I can't do it all on my own. So even that thought of being connected to something bigger where you don't have to do it by yourself, and how that impacts your mindset and your health around how you're better off, you're healthier, you can do more.
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of cool. 100% with that. And one of the things that I'm most excited about in my dissertation is actually looking at that very thing, is all the people that we're measuring their heart rate variability. I'm asking them a lot of questions, a lot of survey questions and scales. One of the ones that I kind of have developed is this relationship map, and one of the relationships within that map that I'm having people, and they get to choose. I don't make them choose this, but I've had a lot of people say it, or like choose these relationships, or the mystical relationship. So it could be God, could be a guardian angel, could be a past ancestor, somebody who's not necessarily like alive or in your presence physically. And so I'm excited to see, what do those relationships look like in their perception, and how does that affect, is that correlated in any way with heart rate variability?
Cool. Really cool. Oh, that's pretty. I just can't wait to like dig into more of your stuff. That's amazing. Like, I want to ask you, when you were talking earlier, you were talking about you did 10 years of marketing before doing all of this, and even as you've been interested in all of this, but like, and how there's so much science and data to back this up, and we need each other, and all these different. We've talked about all these different things that are so crucial and important for our health.
Yeah.
What do you think? How do we get that out there more? How do we help people do this? How do we solve for this? What can we do? I'll tell you my own philosophy, what I'm trying to do, but like, I want to hear your thoughts on what can we do? What would you go do if money wasn't an issue or anything else? Like, what would you do that gives people an environment where they can learn this and apply this kind of knowledge?
Wow. That's a good question. Gee whiz. I mean, if the sky was the limit, wow. I would probably start a media company that is based on well-being, and it wouldn't necessarily, and it would have its own research like lab, or like its own kind of arm of doing its own research that's really cool, and collaborating with other universities and stuff, but it'd be like super well funded, but it would also be attached to this like media company, and so that way, and it would bring in all the best like media minds, and network with like the big channels out there, and then it would create its own, it would become its own channel, and just like kind of like the Huberman, but have that media very shareable and available for as many people as possible. It's hard because there's so much good stuff.
Yeah.
But I mean, that would be the first step. If the sky was the limit, I had $50 million.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Well, if you're a funder thinking about where to invest, this is your guy right here. Because truly, I think that's amazing. I think that's so important, and it's a different take than my take. But that's why it's got us so good, because we're all given special gifts, and you have unique gifts, both an understanding of something so critical as well as a connection to the business side of things, the marketing, the media aspect, which is so important. I'll just give one simple example of why that's so important. I was listening to, I'm doing a series on men's health, and I was listening in preparation for that podcast series. I was listening to Diary of a CEO podcast. I don't know if you know that one with Stephen Bartlett.
Love it.
And he basically called an emergency session. Okay. And he brought in these two experts. It was on men's health, and they talked about this Lost Boys report. And you and I started this conversation by how we all need social connection, but especially men struggle, right? Yeah. And they talk a lot about that in this report. But at the end of this, so they go through and they describe all these problems in society, specifically for men. And then at the end, they're like, where do we send these men? How do we give them the resources? What help is there? And they couldn't answer the question. Yeah. And it was devastating to me. I was like, send them my way. Like, let's go work on this. And that's why I love, and then she actually specifically referenced, she's like, today's society, they're getting their information through podcasts, through other media platforms like that, right? Yeah. They're not going to necessarily go read it in a textbook, but they're getting it from a podcast like this, or a podcast like Huberman's, or what you're going to go do on a much bigger scale. And I hope to heavens that you go do it.
That would be so
because fun. It's so needed. Because one of the things that they also talk about is right now, I mean, there's definitely positive people out there, thankfully, like a Peter Attia, or a Huberman, or a Dr. Hyman, or putting great, Dr. Julianne Holt-Lunstad, like putting really important, critical information out there for people to see, but there's just still not enough. Yeah. And media instead is overwhelmed. TikTok and Twitch or anything else is overwhelmed with some of the negative stuff, right? Yes. Like so much negativity that's out there. And like you said, that there's we talked about this positive spiral effects and also the negative compounding effects.
Yeah.
And it goes both directions, right? So mob mentality. I hate when I get feeds on my Instagram where it's showing these fights and I'm like, why are we celebrating this? Like, why is that what I'm seeing on my feed?
Yeah.
But people see that, it catches their attention, and then it takes so much time and then therefore more content gets out there.
Yeah.
Or, one of the things they talk about on the podcast is how masculinity is suffering, and unfortunately people that are out there are these like alpha males, giving this toxic masculinity, and they're like, where are the ones teaching like good masculinity and getting that out there? So I just love all of that to say, I just am in love with that idea. I wasn't expecting that, but that idea of creating a media company to get this information out there, I think is fascinating. So good on you for that. And please, I'll tell you my what I'm trying to do. I think I've told you this, but I'm launching a human performance center where people can come in and basically in one place address every aspect of your health, right? So, and that's why
I can't wait. I can't wait.
I can't
so
wait.
Excited.
I cannot wait. It's been years in the making.
Yes.
But one of the biggest things is that if I just cared about money, I would have done it remotely, because it's cheaper and no overhead to just like say, hey, like send me your money and I'll give you a program.
Do it on a warehouse
right? Versus buying a building or a physical space. But to me, the most important part of all of this is a place where we can come together in person and actually connect.
Yeah.
While we're also we're working out at the gym, we're in the cold plunge in the sauna, we're doing diagnostics and health tests. We're having somebody like you come in and explain the importance, or doing tests on HRV, and helping them understand their social relationships and how important that is to their health. So it's one place, a physical place, where people can come together and connect on all these health things. And then hopefully it's like this first one will be just the first of many, many hubs. But sorry, you were going to say something on that?
I was just going to say that I think it should involve touch in some, like in a safe way, right? Like safe and like, just like, anyways, we could talk more about that, but like, cause I feel like these conversations alone, there's a lot of co-regulation, but like add touch to the equation. And if you could get like people in a room, all like in a circle, holding hands or something like that. I mean, it sounds woo woo, but like, holy smokes, like that, like put a heart rate monitor on those guys and like test their, cortisol levels before and after, and you're going to see some cool stuff.
Totally. And that, again, celebrating, and I'm hoping to be able to do it in a way where it doesn't come across too woo-woo for people, because I think that can scare people. Also, in this super sensitive society that we're in, this idea of touch and like, oh, but that's going to like, I mean, it's a lawsuit waiting to happen, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so
I don't know how to do it. But
I don't either, but the principle, like figuring out, like we're going to figure something out in that regard, because I couldn't agree more. Like, like there's all the science behind like what a hug does, a 20-second hug, having some kind of physical touch that way with someone is so important. So we will figure out the non-creepy way of doing all of this stuff so that people can experience this more.
Oxytocin booster.
Yeah.
Maybe you have a dog thing, like
there you go. Maybe that's the touch.
I don't know.
As you're touching it. Yeah. It's, and I think, again, to your point, Amita, you'll be such an instrument in helping people get over some of like the sensitivity that they have on, like, even just you hear touch and people are thinking like negative things already.
Yeah.
Where we can flip that and help people understand the positive aspects of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Were you going to say something on that?
No, that's, it's Safe Touch, I think. I don't know. But.
Yeah. Safe Touch. Maybe that's a new company. Who knows? Andy, I have so many things. We're basically at time. And I could go for another couple of hours, no question on this. And I'm going to wait till Tommy comes and kicks us out, to be honest.
Okay.
How are you on time? Let's just be real on that. It's noon.
I think I have an interview at 1, but I can't remember.
Okay.
Let me just double check.
And this is just me being real on the podcast. I don't care, because authenticity is so much more important to me than when I try to make it like perfect. But, I didn't even get to any of my notes on the things that I wanted to talk to you about. Like literally there's still pages of this stuff.
I love it.
I think we'll just
We'll
have
do
to
like
have you
round 2.
on again.
Yeah. I would
Because
love to do
everything
that.
from, you know, a little bit more diving into what your work with Dr. Julianne Holt-Lundstedt. What's the best way to say her name, by the way?
You're saying it right.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. To you know, a lot of the other science that backs it up to Dr. Murthy's book on Together and how important connection is that way. The epidemic of loneliness and what we can do about that. Gosh, there are literally pages of notes still of things that I want to talk to you about.
I mean, if you want, we could still go for another, whatever you think, like 20, 30 minutes if you want to. I don't know what
I appreciate it. I think I'm just going to have you on again.
Okay, perfect.
It's in the same way that Huberman had, like, you know, he has people on multiple times, like Andy Galpin, to talk about exercise. He had to do like 6 episodes or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, you just can't cover this all in one.
For sure.
And I think what we've covered today hopefully gives people just an idea of how important social connection is for our health.
Yeah.
And I just applaud you so much. Thank you for coming and sharing your time. And I honestly, again, I just hope that it just starts people and gives them a little bit of energy to want to do this. And if there's, I mean, truly, I mean this. You and I have been connected for a little bit of time, but even as a friend, if there's anything I can do to help promote this in any kind of way, let me know. Like, I want you to go build this media company, right? I know a lot of VCs. If you need, like, let me know. Like, let's connect, because it's important. I love what you're doing. Thank you for doing it. We need more people like you doing it. And I hope that you and I and your mentors and my mentors and all of us can be just a powerful voice for getting this out there and how important it is to our health. So thank you.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, appreciate it.